Divine Principle, Part 2, Chapter 1, The Providence to Lay the Foundation for Restoration. Section 3, The Providence of Restoration in Abraham's Family. Due to Ham's fallen act, the providence of restoration in Noah's family was not fulfilled. Nevertheless, God had absolutely predestined that the purpose of creation would one day be realized. Therefore, upon the foundation of Noah's heart of loyalty to heaven, God called Abraham and commenced a new chapter in the providence of the restoration with his family. Abraham's family was to restore the foundation for the Messiah, which Noah's family had left incomplete, and receive the Messiah upon that foundation. Thus, as Noah before him, Abraham had to restore through indemnity the foundation of faith, and his sons had to restore through indemnity the foundation of substance. The foundation of faith, the central figure for the foundation of faith. In the providence of restoration in Abraham's family, the central figure to restore the foundation of faith was Abraham. God chose Abraham to inherit the mission of fulfilling the will which he had tried to fulfill with Noah. However, Abraham could not inherit this mission unless he first restored through indemnity all the conditions which had been given to Noah to fulfill, which were lost to Satan due to Ham's sin. The first conditions which Noah's family lost to Satan were the 10 generations from Adam to Noah and the 40-day period of judgment. Therefore, Abraham had to restore through indemnity another 10 generations. Each of these 10 generations was to restore the number 40, which represented the flood judgment. Once the 40-day flood ended in failure, the restoration of each generation had to span its entire length. This could not be accomplished in only 40 days. The providence to restore the flood in each of those 10 generations had to take a longer period of time, 40 years. This is similar to the situation in Moses' time, when the restoration of the failed 40-day spying mission required the people to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. Therefore, after an indemnity period of 10 generations, and 400 years had passed since Noah, God chose Abraham to inherit Noah's mission. The next set of conditions which Noah's family lost to Satan was the position of the father of faith, and the position of Ham, who was to take on the role of Abel. Therefore, Abraham could not stand in Noah's position without first restoring through indemnity the roles of the father of faith and of Ham. To assume the role of the father of faith in place of Noah, Abraham had to make a symbolic offering in faith, with a loyal heart, just as Noah did when he built the ark. Next, how could Abraham restore the position of Ham? Ham was to have represented Abel, the most beloved of God. Both were second sons, and chosen to be the central figures of the substantial offering. Since Satan claimed Ham, according to the principle of restoration through indemnity, God needed to claim someone whom Satan loved most. This was the reason God called Abraham, who was the firstborn of Terah, an idolater. Abraham was to inherit the mission of Noah, and thus the mission of Adam. In this capacity, he represented restored Adam. As God had blessed Adam and Noah, God also blessed Abraham. I will make of you a great nation, and I'll bless you, and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who curses you I will curse, and by you all the families of the earth shall bless themselves. After receiving this blessing, in obedience to God's command, Abraham left his father's house in Haran and entered Canaan with his wife Sarah, his nephew Lot, and all his belongings and servants. In this sense, God set Abraham's course as the model course for restoring Canaan, which Jacob and Moses would walk in their days. Jacob and Moses would take their family members and all their belongings out of Haran and Egypt, respectively, and bring them back to Canaan, while suffering many hardships along the way. Abraham's course also foreshadowed the course which Jesus would one day walk, to take humanity and all things out of Satan's world and bring them back to God's world. The objects for the condition offered for the foundation of faith, Abraham's symbolic offering. God commanded Abraham to offer a dove and a pigeon, a ram and a goat, and a heifer. These were the objects of the condition which he offered to restore the foundation of faith. But before he could make the symbolic offering, Abraham had to demonstrate right faith, just as Noah before him was accounted righteous prior to building the ark as a symbolic offering. The Bible doesn't explain clearly how Noah demonstrated his faith, but from the verse, Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. We can understand that Noah demonstrated faith before he was deemed worthy to receive God's commandment to build the ark. In truth, those who walk the providence of restoration must continually strengthen their faith. Let's investigate how Abraham strengthened his faith in preparation for making the symbolic offering. Since Noah was the second human ancestor, for Abraham to restore the position of Noah, he also had to assume Adam's position. For this reason, he was required to make a symbolic indemnity condition to restore the position of Adam's family before he could make the actual symbolic offering. In this regard, the Bible gives an account of a trip Abraham made to Egypt because of a famine. In Egypt, Abraham feared that the Pharaoh would desire his beautiful wife Sarah and kill him if he knew he was her husband. While she posed as Abraham's sister, the Pharaoh took Sarah for himself. Thereupon, God chastised the Pharaoh. Abraham took back his wife, along with his nephew Lot, and the abundant wealth which the Pharaoh had given him, and they left Egypt. Without knowing it, Abraham walked this providential course to make a symbolic indemnity condition to restore the position of Adam's family. When the archangel took Eve, capturing her under his dominion, all of Eve's descendants and the natural world, Adam and Eve were still brother and sister. For Abraham to make the indemnity condition to restore this, he was deprived of Sarah, who was playing the role of his sister, by the Pharaoh, who represented Satan. He then had to take her back from the Pharaoh as his wife, together with Lot as the representative of all humanity, and wealth symbolizing the natural world. This course, which Abraham walked, as the model course for Jesus to walk in his day, and once they had fulfilled this indemnity condition, Abraham was deemed ready to make the symbolic offering. What was the significance of Abraham's symbolic offering? For Abraham to become the father of faith, he had to restore through indemnity the position of Noah, whom God had intended to raise up as the father of faith, as well as Noah's family. Furthermore, he had to restore the position of Adam and his family. Abraham was thus required to offer in an acceptable manner objects for the condition to restore all that Cain and Abel were supposed to accomplish through their sacrifices, and all that Noah's family was trying to accomplish through the dispensation of the ark. Abraham's symbolic offering consisted of objects with such symbolic meanings. Abraham offered 3 types of objects as the condition for the symbolic offering. First, a dove and a pigeon. Second, a ram and a goat. And third, a heifer. These 3 sacrifices symbolized the cosmos, which was completed through the 3 stages of the growing period. The dove represented the formation stage. When Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist at the Jordan River, the Spirit of God descended and alighted upon him in the form of a dove. This is because Jesus came to bring the completion to the Old Testament age, which, as the formation stage of the providence, was symbolized by the dove. Moreover, there was a second reason for the vision of the dove alighting on Jesus. Jesus was to restore Abraham's mistake in offering this dove, which, as we shall see, Satan snatched away. The ram represented the growth stage. Once Jesus had brought fulfillment to the Old Testament age, thus restoring everything represented by the dove, he commenced the New Testament age at the growth stage of the providence, when everything represented by the ram was to be restored. After John the Baptist testified that he had seen the Spirit descend on Jesus as a dove, meaning that Jesus was the one to complete the formation stage of the providence, he testified that Jesus would begin the growth stage mission, saying, "Behold, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world." The heifer represented the completion stage. It's written that once, when Samson put forth a riddle to the Philistines, they attained the answer by having Samson's wife press him to reveal it. Samson said to them, "If you'd not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle." here metaphorically calling his wife a heifer. Jesus came as the bridegroom to all humanity. All devout believers should become his brides, waiting the time of his return. After these brides celebrate the marriage of the Lamb with Jesus, their bridegroom, they are to live in the kingdom of heaven in spiritual oneness with him as his wives, metaphorically speaking. Therefore, the completed Testament age following the second advent of Jesus is the age of the heifer, or the age of the wife. The reason why some spiritual mediums have received the revelation that the present era is the age of a cow or heifer is because we are entering the completion stage. What were the three sacrifices to indemnify? Abraham was to restore by this offering all that God could not restore through the symbolic offerings made by the families of Adam and Noah. Offerings that were made properly, but then forfeited to Satan due to the subsequent failures. Abraham's offering was also to make a symbolic indemnity condition as restitution for their failures in making the substantial offering. In other words, the purpose of Abraham's symbolic offering of the three types of objects for the condition was to restore in his generation horizontally all the indemnity conditions which had accumulated in the course of the providence vertically through the three generations of Adam, Noah, and Abraham. Why did Abraham place the three sacrifices, the dove and pigeon, the ram and goat, and the heifer, symbolizing the formation, growth, and completion stages on one altar? Before the fall, Adam was responsible to grow through all three stages in his one lifetime. Similarly, Abraham, now in the position of Adam, was supposed to restore all at once through the long providence which God had conducted, all at once the long providence which God had conducted through the three providential generations of Adam, formation, Noah, growth, and Adam, Abraham, completion. Through one offering, he could restore all the defiled conditions containing the number 3. The symbolism of Abraham's sacrifice reveals God's will to fulfill the entire providence of restoration once and for all. Now let us study how Abraham made the symbolic offering. He said to him, "Bring me a heifer 3 years old, and a she-goat 3 years old, a ram 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon." And he brought him all these, cut them in two, and laid each half over the other, but he didn't cut the birds in two. And when the birds of prey came down upon the carcasses, Abraham drove them away. As the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abraham, and lo, a dread and great darkness fell upon him. Then the Lord said to Abram, "Know of a surety that your descendants will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be slaves there, and they will be oppressed for 400 years. Because Abraham did not cut the dove and pigeon in two, as he should have, birds of prey came down and defiled the sacrifices. As a result of his mistake, the Israelites were destined to enter Egypt and suffer hardship for 400 years. Why was it a sin not to cut the birds in half? This question can be understood only with the help of the principle. Let's first investigate the reason why Abraham was instructed to cut the sacrifices in half. God's work of salvation aims to restore the sovereignty of goodness by first dividing good from evil, then destroying evil and uplifting the good. This is the reason Adam had to be divided into Cain and Abel before the sacrifice could be made. This is the reason why in Noah's day God struck down evil through the flood judgment and winnowed out Noah's family as the good. God had Abraham cut the sacrifices in two before offering them, with the intention of doing the symbolic work of dividing good from evil, which was left unaccomplished by Adam and Noah. The sacrifices were to be divided first to restore the situation in Adam's family, in which Abel and Cain were divided into representative of good and representative of evil. Second, it was to restore the situation of having divided good from evil during the 40 days of Noah's flood. Third, it was to make the symbolic condition to separate a realm of good sovereignty out of the universe ruled by Satan. Fourth, it was to make the condition to sanctify the offering by draining out the blood of death, which had entered fallen humanity when they were bound in blood ties to Satan. Why was it a sin not to divide the offering? First, Not dividing the offering has the significance of not dividing Abel and Cain. Without being divided, the offering could not be acceptable to God because it didn't provide him with an Abel-type object partner, which he could take. Consequently, the mistakes Cain and Abel had made in their sacrifices were not restored. Second, not dividing the offering was tantamount to repeating the failure of the providence in Noah's time, when good and evil remained undivided despite the flood. Like the failure of Noah's family, Abraham's failure to divide the offering also deprived God of his good object partner. Thus it repeated the mistake which made the dispensation of the flood a failure. Third, not dividing the offering meant that there was no symbolic condition to separate a realm of God's good sovereignty out of the universe under Satan's dominion. And fourth, because the blood of death was not drained out of it, not dividing the offering meant it could not be sanctified, a sanctified offering acceptable to God. In other words, when Abraham offered the birds without first dividing them, it meant that he offered what had not been wrested from Satan's possession. His mistake had the effect of acknowledging Satan's claim of possession over them. The dove, symbolizing the formation stage, remained in Satan's possession. Consequently, Satan also claimed the ram, symbolizing the growth stage, and the heifer, symbolizing the completion stage, both of which were to be fulfilled based on the formation stage. Since it had the effect of handing over the entire symbolic offering to Satan, not dividing the birds constituted a sin. Next, let's examine what is meant by the verse that birds of prey descended upon the carcasses. Since the fall of the first human ancestors, Satan has always been stalking those with whom God worked to fulfill his will. When Cain and Abel were making their sacrifices, Satan was couching at the door. In the story of Noah, the raven circling about signifies how Satan was looking for an opportunity to invade Noah's family right after the flood. Similarly, when Abraham was making his symbolic offering, Satan was on the lookout for an opportunity to seize the sacrifice. He profaned it as soon as he saw that the birds were not divided. The Bible describes this by the image of birds of prey descending upon the sacrifice. Abraham's mistake in making the symbolic offering caused the offering to be defiled. All the conditions God intended to restore through it were lost. As a consequence, Abraham's descendants had to suffer oppression and slavery for 400 years in the land of Egypt. Let's investigate the reason for this. God called upon Abraham and commanded him to make the symbolic offering at the completion of a 400-year period for the separation of Satan. This period had been set up to restore through indemnity the 10 generations from Adam to Noah, and the 40-day period of the flood judgment lost to Satan due to Ham's sin. It was also the indemnity period necessary to establish Abraham as the father of faith when he completed the symbolic offering. When Abraham's mistake in the symbolic offering allowed Satan to claim the offering as his, that 400-year period was also lost to Satan. To recreate on the national level the situation before Abraham's failure in the symbolic offering, which was itself parallel to when Noah was called upon to build the ark, God set up another 400-year period for the separation of Satan. During this period, the Israelites were slaves in Egypt. By enduring through this period, the Israelites were to restore, this time on the national level, the situations of Noah and Abraham at the outset of their missions as the fathers of faith, thereupon also laying the foundation for Moses to begin his mission. Hence, this period of slavery was both the time when the Israelites were being punished for Abraham's mistake, and the time when they were laying the foundation to cut off ties to Satan and commence God's new providence. As explained earlier, God had hoped to fulfill all at once the dispensations in the formation, growth, and completion stages by having Abraham successfully make the symbolic offering of 3 types of sacrifices on one altar. Contrary to this plan, Abraham failed, repeating the mistakes of the past. Consequently, the providence centered on him was prolonged through the 3 generations of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham's offering of Isaac. After Abraham failed in the symbolic offering, God commanded him to sacrifice his only son, Isaac, as a burnt offering. In this way, God began a new dispensation for the purpose of restoring through indemnity Abraham's failure. According to the principle of predestination, when someone whom God has foreordained to accomplish a certain portion of his will fails to complete his responsibility, God doesn't use him a second time. Why then did God work with Abraham again when he had him offer Isaac? We can advance three reasons. First, the number of 3 represents completion. God's principle requires that when the providence to lay the foundation for the Messiah takes place for the 3rd time, it must be brought to completion. Therefore, God's providence to lay the foundation for the Messiah, which began in Adam's family as the first dispensation, and continued in Noah's family as the second dispensation, had to be concluded in Abraham's family, which was the 3rd dispensation. For this reason, Abraham was given the opportunity to fulfill a condition of indemnity, although at a greater price, and thereby make symbolic restoration of all he had lost when he failed in the earlier symbolic offering. The greater indemnity condition was the offering of his son Isaac as a sacrifice. Second, as was explained earlier, when Abraham was making his sacrifice, he was in the position of Adam. Satan had attacked both Adam and his son Cain, defiling the family over the course of 2 generations. Hence, according to the principle of restoration through indemnity, God could work to take back Abraham and his son Isaac over the course of 2 generations. Third, we learned that Noah could make the symbolic offering of the ark himself, even though he was in the same position as Adam, who could not make the sacrifice directly. This is because he stood upon the merit of Abel, who had demonstrated a faithful heart when he succeeded in the symbolic offering. When Abraham was called by God, he stood on the merit of both Abel, who succeeded in the symbolic offering at the formation stage, and Noah, who succeeded in the symbolic offering at the growth stage. Upon this double foundation, Abraham was to make the symbolic offering at the completion stage. Accordingly, even though Abraham failed, God could raise him up and give him another chance to make an offering based on the accumulated merit of Abel's and Noah's faithful hearts. Before he could offer Isaac as a sacrifice, Abraham once again had to demonstrate right faith by repeating the symbolic indemnity condition for the restoration of Adam's family, as he had when he was about to make the symbolic offering. This is the reason Abraham once again put Sarah in the position of his sister and let her be taken by a king, this time by Abimelech of Gerar. After she became the king's wife, Abraham took her back. This time, Abraham also took back with him slaves, who symbolized humanity, and riches, which symbolized the natural world. How did Abraham offer Isaac? When they came to the place which God had told him, Abraham built an altar there and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. Then Abraham put forth his hand, and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham! And he said, Here am I. He said, Don't lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Abraham's faith was absolute. In obedience to God's command, he was about to kill Isaac, his only son, intending to offer him as a burnt offering. God intervened at that moment and told Abraham not to kill the boy. Abraham's zeal to do God's will and his resolute actions, carried out with absolute faith, obedience, and loyalty, lifted him up to the position of having already killed Isaac. Therefore, he completely separated Satan from Isaac. God commanded Abraham not to kill Isaac because Isaac, now severed of all ties to Satan, stood on God's side. We must also understand that when God said, Now I know, he revealed both his reproach to Abraham for his earlier failure in the symbolic offering and his joy over the successful offering of Isaac. Because Abraham succeeded in his offering of Isaac, the providence of restoration in Abraham's family could be carried on by Isaac. Abraham took 3 days to reach the place on Mount Moriah where he was to offer his son Isaac as a burnt offering. This 3-day period for purifying Isaac was to begin a new course in the providence. Thenceforth, a 3-day period has been required for the separation of Satan at the start of new dispensations. We find many instances of such periods in the history of the providence. When Jacob was setting out from Haran with his family to begin the family course to restore Canaan, there was a 3-day period for the separation of Satan. Moses, too, led the Israelites through a 3-day period for the separation of Satan as they left Egypt to begin the national course to restore Canaan. When Jesus began the worldwide spiritual course to restore Canaan, he spent 3 days in the tomb to accomplish the separation of Satan. Isaac's position and his symbolic offering in the sight of God. It was explained earlier that although Abraham's symbolic offering ended in failure, there remained some grounds in the principle for the foundation for the Messiah to be established centered on him. Yet since he had failed in his responsibility, Abraham was not qualified to repeat the symbolic offering himself. Somehow, God had to find a way to regard Abraham as though he has not failed in the symbolic offering or caused the prolongation of the providence. To achieve this, God commanded Abraham to offer Isaac as a burnt offering. God had previously promised Abraham that he would raise up a chosen people from the lineage of Isaac. Behold, the word of the Lord came to him, "Your own son shall be your heir." And he brought him outside and said, "Look toward the heaven, and number the stars, if you are able to number them." Then he said to him, "So shall your descendants be." When Abraham was prepared to slay his son, even the son of the promise, he demonstrated utmost loyalty to heaven. This act of faith was tantamount to Abraham killing himself, a self which had been defiled by Satan due to his earlier failure in the symbolic offering. Accordingly, when God saved Isaac from death, Abraham was also resurrected to life, now loosed from all the ties with which Satan had bound him when his symbolic offering was defiled. Furthermore, Abraham and Isaac attained inseparable oneness in their fidelity to God's will. Though Isaac and Abraham were two different individuals, when God brought them back to life, they became as one individual, one person, in the sight of God. Even though the dispensation through Abraham had failed and was prolonged through Isaac, as long as Isaac succeeded, Isaac's victory would become Abraham's own victory. Therefore, God would be able to regard Abraham as not having failed, and the dispensation as not having been prolonged. It's not clear how old Isaac was when Abraham offered the boy as a sacrifice. He was old enough to carry the wood for the sacrifice, and when he saw that there was no lamb to be offered, he inquired of his father about it. Isaac was apparently old enough to understand his father's intentions. We can infer that he helped his father, even though he knew that his father was preparing to offer him as a sacrifice. If Isaac had resisted his father's attempt to offer him as a sacrifice, God definitely would not have accepted the offering. In fact, Isaac demonstrated a faith as great as that of Abraham. Together their faith made this offering successful, and there was no way for Satan to retain his hold on him. In making the offering, Isaac and Abraham underwent a process of death and resurrection. As a result, two things were accomplished. First, Abraham succeeded in the separation of Satan, who had invaded him because of the mistake in the symbolic offering. He restored to indemnity the position he had occupied before he had made the mistake, and transferred his providential mission to Isaac from this restored position. Second, by faithfully obeying God's will, Isaac inherited the divine mission from Abraham and demonstrated the faith which qualified him to make the symbolic offering. After the divine mission had passed from Abraham to Isaac, Abraham offered the ram provided by God as the substitute for Isaac. Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram, caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. In fact, this was the symbolic offering by which Isaac restored the foundation of faith. Since Isaac had carried the wood for the sacrifice, we can infer that he participated in the offering of the ram. Thus, even though it's written that Abraham made the symbolic offering, Isaac, who had united with Abraham and inherited his mission, was given providential credit for the offering. In this way, Isaac, having inherited Abraham's mission, made the symbolic offering and restored to indemnity the foundation of faith. The foundation of substance. Isaac thus became the central figure to restore the foundation of faith in place of Abraham. He established the foundation of faith by making the symbolic offering of the ram in a manner acceptable to God. To establish the foundation for the Messiah and Isaac's family, the foundation of substance had to be laid next. For this purpose, Isaac's sons Esau and Jacob had to be placed in the divided positions of Cain and Abel respectively. By making the substantial offering, they were responsible to fulfill the indemnity condition, to remove the fallen nature, and lay the foundation of substance. If Abraham had not failed in the symbolic offering, Isaac and his half-brother Ishmael would have stood in the position of Cain, Abel, and Cain. They would have been responsible to fulfill the indemnity condition, to remove the fallen nature which Cain and Abel did not accomplish. However, because Abraham failed in the offering, God set up Isaac in the position of Abraham, and Esau and Jacob in the positions originally intended for Ishmael and Isaac. It was then up to Esau and Jacob to fulfill the indemnity condition, to remove the fallen nature. For the purpose of making the substantial offering, Esau and Jacob were in the same positions under their father Isaac as Cain and Abel in relation to Adam, and as Shem and Ham in relation to Noah. Isaac's eldest son Esau represented Abraham's first symbolic offering defiled by Satan, while the second son Jacob represented the offering of Isaac, by which Satan was separated. Moreover, Esau assumed the role of Cain as the representative of evil, while Jacob stood in the position of Abel as the representative of goodness. Esau and Jacob began fighting inside their mother's womb, because they were in these opposing positions. Even then, God loved Jacob and hated Esau, but this was for a providential reason. They were supposed to restore through indemnity the mistakes which Cain and Abel had made in their offering. However, before Esau and Jacob could fulfill the indemnity condition to remove the fallen nature and make the substantial offering, Jacob first had to fulfill the indemnity condition to restore the position of Abel. In all, Jacob had the following missions. First, he should fulfill the indemnity condition to restore the position of Abel, the central figure of the substantial offering. Next, he should make the substantial offering. Finally, as will be discussed in the next section, Jacob would enter Egypt to commence the 400-year course of indemnity required of his descendants because of Abraham's mistake in the symbolic offering. Jacob made the indemnity condition to restore the position of Abel in the following manner. First, Jacob fulfilled the condition of victory in the fight to restore, on the individual level, the birthright of the eldest son. Because Satan took dominion over the universe created by God, Satan assumed the position of the eldest son. God was cast in the position of the second son, from which he had to work his way toward restoring the birthright. For this reason, God has favored second sons over firstborn sons, as in the case of Esau and Jacob. I have loved Jacob, but I've hated Esau. Jacob is the second son who had the responsibility to restore the birthright of the firstborn son, cleverly obtained from Esau in exchange for some bread and a pottage of lentils. Because Jacob highly valued the birthright and worked to reclaim it from his brother, God had Isaac bless him. On the contrary, God did not bless Esau because he thought so little of his birthright that he traded it for a bowl of lentil pottage. Second, Jacob went to Haran, which represented the satanic world. After suffering through 21 years of drudgery, he triumphed over Laban in the fight to restore the birthright by gaining family and wealth as his due inheritance. After winning the victory, Jacob returned to Canaan. Third, on his way back to Canaan, the land of the promised blessing, Jacob triumphed in wrestling with an angel at the ford of Jabbok, thereby securing the restoration of dominion over the angel in a substantial struggle. Through these three victories, Jacob restored through indemnity the position of Abel. Thereupon Jacob became the central figure of the substantial offering. Esau and Jacob thus secured the positions in which Cain and Abel had stood at the moment when God accepted Abel's offering. Accordingly, for Jacob and Esau to fulfill the indemnity condition to remove the fallen nature, Esau needed to love Jacob, respect him as his mediator to God, obediently submit to Jacob's directions, and finally multiply goodness by inheriting goodness from the bearer of God's blessing. Indeed, when Jacob returned to Canaan with his family and wealth after enduring 21 years of hardship in Haran, he moved Esau to overcome his former hostility. And Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the 2 maids. And he put the maids with their children in front, then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. He himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times, until he came near to his brother. But Esau ran to meet him, and embraced him, and fell on his neck, and kissed him, and they wept. When Esau opened his arms and affectionately welcomed Jacob, they fulfilled the indemnity condition to remove the fallen nature. For the first time, the foundation of substance was laid successfully. When Jacob and Esau succeeded in making the substantial offering, they restored through indemnity the previous failures in making the substantial offerings, the failures of Cain and Abel in Adam's family, and of Ham and Shem in Noah's family. Their victory in the providence, centered on Abraham, also restored through indemnity horizontally, in one family, the long vertical course of history in which God had been working to restore the foundation of substance. Esau had been in the position to be hated by God from the time he was inside his mother's womb, only because he had been given the role of Cain, who was on Satan's side, for the purpose of setting up an indemnity condition in the providence of restoration. Once he submitted to Jacob and completed his portion of responsibility, he stood in the position of restored Cain, and was at last able to receive God's love. The foundation for the Messiah. God's work to lay the foundation for the Messiah, which he first tried to establish in Adam's family, had to be conducted 3 times, because the central figures of the providence of restoration could not fulfill their portion of responsibility. The 3rd attempt was in Abraham's time, yet even this was prolonged when he failed in the symbolic offering. Isaac and his family inherited the will and laid the foundation of faith and the foundation of substance. At last, the foundation for the Messiah was established. One would expect that the Messiah would have come on the earth at that time. However, the foundation for the Messiah also requires a social environment conducive to his coming. The foundation must make it feasible for this satanic world to be restored to God's kingdom, ruled by the Messiah. In the providence in Adam's and Noah's families, there were no other families which could possibly attack or corrupt the central family. If either of these families had laid the foundation for the Messiah on the family level, the Messiah could have come without opposition. However, by Abraham's time, fallen people had already built up satanic nations, which could have easily overpowered Abraham's family. Hence, even though the foundation for the Messiah was laid at that time, it was a limited foundation on the family level. The Messiah could not safely come on that foundation. The foundation of a sovereign state was needed to cope with the nations of the satanic world. Such support would have been necessary even if Abraham had not failed in the symbolic offering, but had succeeded with his sons Isaac and Ishmael in making the substantial offering to lay the family foundation for the Messiah. It still would not have been safe for the Messiah to come until Abraham's descendants had multiplied in Canaan and established a national foundation for the Messiah. As it was, though the descendants of Isaac had established the family foundation for the Messiah, they would leave their homeland and suffer in a foreign land for 400 years as the penalty for Abraham's mistake. Despite their suffering in Egypt, they would flourish and consolidate as a people. They would return to Canaan and build the national foundation for the Messiah as a sovereign nation prepared for the Messiah and his work. A course of indemnity had been placed upon the shoulders of Abraham's descendants due to his mistake in the symbolic offering. Jacob was to begin this course of indemnity, not Isaac. Indeed, the one who shoulders the major burden in walking the course of indemnity is the Abel-type person who serves as the central figure of the substantial offering. Abel in Adam's family, Ham in Noah's family, Isaac in Abraham's family, and Jacob in Isaac's family carried the major burdens in walking the indemnity courses set down for their families. Among them, Jacob was the only able figure who stood upon the foundation for the Messiah. Therefore, he would walk the model course for separation of Satan, setting the pattern for the Messiah to follow at his coming. Jacob's family stood upon the foundation for the Messiah, which had been completed in Isaac's family. Inheriting the position of Isaac's family, they set out to complete the dispensation entrusted to Abraham by taking responsibility for Abraham's sin and embarking upon the 400-year course of indemnity. In Isaac's family, it was Jacob, in the position of Abel, who walked the entire course of indemnity. In Jacob's family, it was Joseph, the son of Rachel, Jacob's wife on God's side, who was to secure the position of Abel by entering Egypt and walking the course of indemnity. After being sold into slavery by his brothers and brought to Egypt, Joseph rose to the office of prime minister of Egypt by the age of 30. He witnessed the realization of a prophecy which God had given him in his dreams while he was still a child. First, Joseph's half-brothers, born of Leah, Jacob's wife on Satan's side, entered Egypt and surrendered themselves to him. Later, all of Jacob's children entered Egypt, and finally they brought their father to Egypt. In this way, Jacob's family began the indemnity course to build a nation which would one day receive the Messiah. Jacob, as a central figure, who laid the foundation for the Messiah in Isaac's family, was responsible to shoulder Abraham's sin. He was also responsible to embark upon an indemnity course to realize, on the national level, the will which had been entrusted to Isaac. Therefore, as was the case with Abraham and Isaac, God regarded Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as the same person with respect to his will, even though they were three different individuals. Accordingly, Jacob's success meant Isaac's success, and Isaac's success meant Abraham's success. The providence of restoration, centering on Abraham, though it was extended to Isaac and Jacob, came to be regarded in the sight of God as having been accomplished in Abraham's own generation without any prolongation. It's written, "I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." This verse indicates that although there were three generations, God regarded as one generation these ancestors who collectively accomplished the will. God intended to fulfill the goal of his providence by establishing the national foundation for the Messiah and sending the Messiah to that prepared nation. To accomplish this, God had Jacob's family enter Egypt, the satanic world, where they would suffer as slaves for 400 years. Then, as promised to Abraham, God would raise them up as the chosen people and bring them back to Canaan. The foundation for the Messiah, established in Isaac's family, became the basis upon which to begin the course of indemnity to establish the national foundation for the Messiah. The period of 2,000 years, from Adam to Abraham, was in effect the period to lay the basis for this national providence to begin the next era. In conclusion, Jacob was victorious in taking responsibility for the indemnity course to pay for Abraham's mistake. By using his wisdom for the sake of God's will, Jacob triumphed as an individual in his struggle with Esau to win the birthright. He entered Haran, and as a family, triumphed in the 21-year struggle with his uncle Laban to win the birthright. On his way back from Haran to Canaan, Jacob was victorious in the fight with the angel. He was the first fallen man to fulfill the indemnity condition to restore dominion over the angel. Therefore, he received the name Israel, signifying that he set the pattern and laid the groundwork upon which the chosen people would be established. After returning to Canaan with these victories, Jacob won Esau's heart, and together they fulfilled the indemnity condition to remove the fallen nature. Jacob thus victoriously completed the model course to bring Satan to submission. Moses, Jesus, even the people of Israel would walk this course after the pattern set by Jacob. The history of Israel can serve as a good historical source for understanding the course to bring Satan to submission on the national level. For this reason, it's central to the study of the providence of restoration. Some lessons from Abraham's course. First, Abraham's course demonstrates that God's predestination concerning the manner in which his will is fulfilled is conditional. The providence of restoration could not be fulfilled by God's power alone. It can only be fulfilled in conjunction with the human portion of responsibility. Hence, although God called upon Abraham for the purpose of fulfilling the providence of restoration, when he failed to complete his responsibility, God's will was not fulfilled. Second, Abraham's course demonstrates that God's predestination concerning human beings is conditional. Although God preordained Abraham to be the father of faith by succeeding in his offering, when he couldn't complete his responsibility, his mission extended to Isaac and Jacob. Third, Abraham's course shows us that when human beings fail to complete their responsibility, the fulfillment of God's will is always delayed, and its restoration requires fulfillment of a greater indemnity condition. In Abraham's case, God's will was to be accomplished by merely sacrificing animals, and upon this failure, however, it had to be accomplished by offering his beloved son, Isaac, as a sacrifice, and had to be completed through Isaac and Jacob. Fourth, Abraham's cutting the sacrifices in two provides a lesson that each of us must divide our own self as an offering to separate good from evil. A life of faith involves putting ourselves in the position of an offering. Only by dividing good from evil in ourselves can we become living offerings pleasing to God. We should constantly separate good from evil within ourselves, according to the standard of God's will. If we neglect to do this, a condition is set up for Satan to invade.